My name is Hans Kwak. Welcome to this short course on zero-emission city logistics. I'm working as a senior researcher at TNO and as a professor of applied science at the Breda University. Why do we look at zero-emission city logistics? A lot of cities aim at reducing the local emissions to improve the air quality in the cities, for example, by ultra-low emission zones or zero-emission zones. And they also look at increasing the amount of zero-emission trucks and vans in the entire fleet in order to reduce CO2 emissions to make sure that the climate agreements will be met. In the Netherlands, they're working on zero-emission zones by 2025 to 2030 in order to reduce the amount of CO2 emissions caused by freight transport. And the city logistics, if you also include the trucks traveling to and from the city, are good for about 1/3 of all the emissions of transport in freight transport in the Netherlands. So that's a reason to work on zero-emission logistics. And one of the ways to do that is to clean the fleet. Now the diesel trucks are polluting and they are producing both local emissions as global emissions, and they try to change by policies like zero-emission zones to a cleaner fleet with zero-emission vehicles. These cleaner vehicles that are feasible and are able to make deliveries are electric vehicles at the moment. To give you a bit of an idea how far we are in this transition, if you count for Rotterdam, about 80,000 vans enter every week the city center and about 10,000 trucks. And at the moment, there are only 9,000 commercial vans or electric vans available in the Netherlands, and there are about 250 trucks, electric trucks. So although the transition is starting, there's a long way to go in order to make the city logistics fleet entirely zero emission. What's actually changing if you want to use zero emission trucks? And I use a business model canvas in order to show you what zero emission city logistics would mean from a transporter perspective. So first of all, there are new partners necessary. More and more electric vehicles are becoming available from OEMs, and that means that you can just buy it, especially for the smaller vehicles, the vans. These are available from manufacturers. The larger vehicles are getting more and more available, and manufacturers announce that they will be available soon, but they are not available yet for all transport operators. And one of the main differences is that you need to have charging infrastructure, because you can't go to a fuel station to fuel your truck, but you need to have electricity and you have to charge it. And there is a limited range of these vehicles, so that means that you also have to change something in your activity. And it's more difficult to plan. So the average range is now between 100 to 200 kilometers. That means that for like city logistics operations, sometimes you can do it, you can make your full day. For example, parcel and post companies can do that. But for the larger trucks making deliveries, the range is limited, which means that you have to really think about planning and what kind of trip you can make and when you have to charge and where. And that's also one of the things. So the purchasing price is far higher. That's due to the high price of the batteries. Although the costs are reducing, the purchasing price is still high. On the other hand, the operating costs are much lower, which means that if you make a lot of kilometers, the total cost of ownership will become more or less even. But making a lot of kilometers is quite difficult at the moment because of the limited range of the battery capacity that allows you for. You need the charging infrastructure, so you need it at the hub when the vehicles are just standing or you're waiting there, or you need it somewhere on your route where you can fast charge. But this takes a longer time, so you also have to take this in account in your planning. Overall, this means that we see that the costs, the initial costs are higher. Then if you look at the TCO perspective for the smaller vehicles, it's more or less even already. If you can charge and if the round trips are within the battery allowed round trip length in the range. And you see that there is a development in the cost. The battery prices are becoming lower, and the ranges of the battery increase. So in time, the TCO will be more favorable for electric vehicles. There are other things that determine the total cost of ownership. For example, how large your battery is. Sometimes you can have a smaller battery and do smaller round trips for some of the vehicles, and for others maybe larger. The availability of the vehicles, manufacturers now are making them more and more available, but also on your charging strategy, whether you can charge on the route at a fast charging location. For smaller vehicles, for the vans, that's often possible. For the larger trucks, there are hardly any charging infrastructure available to go to. Now, if you look at the revenue side, basically you see that from a customer perspective, it's not so that they pay a higher amount for zero-emission deliveries. So on the one hand, you have a higher cost. On the other hand, you don't have a higher revenue, which means that at the moment there are a lot of subsidies necessary and other policy restrictions in order to make this transition go forward, because there's not yet a business case. But what we learned of a lot of different pilots and demonstrations is that these vehicles are very well able to do the operations as long as it's within the range of the vehicle, and that if it's not within the range, a new way of planning is required in order to make sure that you plan where to charge the vehicle and to take that in account. Finally, there's another point that if you have larger fleets of electric vehicles, you also need an expanded capacity of the electricity network in order to make sure that all the vehicles can charge at the same time. Fast charging is still starting, so especially for the larger trucks, this is something that has to be developed. Also, fast charging points. Getting familiar with charging and planning, logistics planning, round trip planning is something that companies have to learn to get familiar with in order to get over the range anxiety. And finally, this is going to. So at the moment, it's basically the policy restrictions and the lower environmental zones and the zero emission zones that are driving this transition. But it's getting more and more, and if the vehicles are getting better, there's no way that this will be stopped for the city logistics operations. Thank you.